Why did John Wayne call segregation responsible? The glittering world of old Hollywood wasn't just built on talent and dreams. It was shaped by exclusion, prejudice, and deep-rooted racism. Golden Age Hollywood was a world riddled with prejudice and exclusion. Today, we're pulling back the curtain to reveal a shocking truth. Many of the legends you grew up admiring were, in fact, deeply racist by nature. Let's dive in. John Wayne. John Wayne is still remembered as the epitome of the American cowboy and a larger-than-life Hollywood hero. But beneath his screen persona, Wayne's personal views were deeply problematic and unapologetically racist. His 1971 Playboy interview remains infamous, where he said outright, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Wayne didn't stop there. He also refused to acknowledge or apologize for the legacy of slavery in America, insisting that it was so long ago it wasn't worth discussing. He opposed Native American rights and was vocal about his distaste for civil rights advancements. On movie sets, his influence was so strong that he sometimes dictated casting choices, ensuring minorities were sidelined. Even decades after his death, institutions like the University of Southern California and Orange County's airport have debated removing his name due to these comments. Wayne's attitudes weren't merely reflective of his era. He actively resisted social change, making his racism an integral and enduring part of his public and private identity. Walt Disney. Walt Disney's name is virtually synonymous with wholesome entertainment, but his legacy is clouded by allegations of racism that run deep into his studio's history. Early Disney films and cartoons are littered with offensive racial stereotypes, most notably in Song of the South, a movie so problematic it remains locked away in Disney's vault, never released for modern audiences. Blackface gags, exaggerated accents, and caricatures were common in his animation. Behind the scenes, Disney was accused by former employees of making racist comments and creating a work environment where non-white talent was excluded or relegated to menial roles. He was known to socialize and do business only within all-white circles. During the Civil Rights Movement, Disney showed little support or interest, and his personal correspondence often expressed discomfort about a more integrated America. While Disney's defenders point to his business achievements, it's clear he contributed to the normalization of racism in American culture. His reluctance to change and his company's history of offensive content demonstrate that his racial attitudes were more a personal choice than just a reflection of his era. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, often called the King of Hollywood, is a beloved figure, but his legacy isn't as spotless as many believe. Gable was the star of Gone with the Wind, a film itself criticized for glorifying the Old South and minimizing the horrors of slavery. Although he once threatened to quit a segregated set, this act was largely symbolic and didn't translate into a pattern of anti-racist behavior. On most of his film projects, Gable maintained a distance from black actors and rarely used his substantial influence to challenge Hollywood's entrenched racism. Letters and recollections from colleagues indicate he was uncomfortable with efforts to include minorities in more significant roles. Gable often seemed indifferent to social progress, preferring the familiar racial hierarchy he grew up with. Off-screen, he moved in almost exclusively white social circles and avoided speaking publicly about racial issues, a silence that many now interpret as tacit acceptance. Despite his charm and star power, Gable's actions and inactions reflect a mindset that was exclusionary by nature. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn was celebrated for her independence and progressive ideas, especially about women's rights. However, her attitudes toward race were nowhere near as groundbreaking. Born into a privileged New England family, Hepburn's upbringing was shaped by social exclusivity, and she rarely interacted with people of color. Throughout her career, she carefully curated her image and associations, often choosing to work only with all-white casts and avoiding storylines that addressed race or featured minorities in meaningful roles. Biographers recount stories of Hepburn making dismissive remarks about racial integration, and she was rarely seen publicly supporting the civil rights movement. On set, she reportedly showed a preference for white colleagues, subtly enforcing the era's racial barriers. Her selective activism, fighting fiercely for women's equality, but not for racial justice, reflects a narrow vision of progress. Hepburn's legacy as a strong, pioneering woman is secure, but her reluctance to support broader equality shows her progressivism was limited and shaped by the boundaries of her own privilege. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy is often remembered for his gravitas and sincerity, both on-screen and off. But the legendary actor's attitudes toward race reveal a less admirable side. Raised in an insular Irish Catholic community, Tracy carried conservative views into adulthood and into Hollywood. While he was often friendly and approachable with his peers, Tracy preferred to keep his social and professional circles almost exclusively white. On set, he reportedly felt uncomfortable around black actors and would avoid engaging with them beyond what was strictly necessary for the film. He was also known to make offhand racist comments, which, although common for the era, were still revealing of his personal beliefs. Tracy resisted taking roles or participating in projects that featured integrated casts or tackled racial issues head-on, viewing them as controversial or unnecessary. While Tracy's film career earned him respect and accolades, his behind-the-scenes behavior reinforces the fact that for many Golden Age stars, progress on race was not a priority, and in Tracy's case, something he quietly resisted. James Stewart. James Stewart's gentle demeanor and boy-next-door image made him one of America's most beloved actors. But the reality was more complicated. Stewart grew up in a small, almost entirely white town, and rarely interacted with non-white people until well into adulthood. His conservative upbringing left him with a deep mistrust of those who were different, and colleagues have described him as quietly but firmly racist. Black actor Woody Strode accused Stewart of being openly discriminatory during the filming of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Stewart's anti-communist zeal also put him in close association with J. Edgar Hoover, acting as an informant on colleagues with left-leaning or progressive views, including those who supported racial integration. Despite his nice guy reputation, Stewart was uncomfortable with Hollywood's changing landscape and made little effort to adapt. His influence ensured he worked with like-minded people, keeping minority voices at bay. While his films continue to be cherished, Stewart's legacy is stained by his steadfast commitment to exclusion and old-fashioned prejudices. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney started in show business as a child and became one of the industry's most familiar faces. But his career is also a stark example of Hollywood's casual racism. Rooney's most notorious moment came with his portrayal of Mr. Yunyoshi in Breakfast at Tiffany's, a Japanese caricature so offensive it remains shocking even by the standards of the 1960s. Rooney donned yellow face makeup, exaggerated his accent, and played the role for laughs, something he defended for decades, claiming audiences were too sensitive. Rooney's penchant for racist humor wasn't limited to his roles. On set and in interviews, he often made derogatory jokes and remarks about minorities. He rarely showed remorse, even as social attitudes changed, and continued to defend his most offensive performances late into his life. Rooney's treatment of minority colleagues was described as dismissive, further highlighting that his racism was not just a matter of scripts, but a deep-seated aspect of his personality and worldview. Walter Brennan. Walter Brennan was a prolific character actor with 3 Oscars to his name, but his off-screen views made him a controversial figure. Brennan was known for his open support of far-right groups, especially the John Birch Society, an organization that fought against civil rights and integration. He wasn't shy about his bigotry, reportedly celebrating the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and frequently referring to civil rights activists as communists. Brennan's racism extended to his daily behavior on set, where he often clashed with or belittled minority colleagues. He surrounded himself with people who shared his views and was quick to ostracize anyone who challenged his prejudices. Unlike some of his peers, Brennan didn't even attempt to hide his beliefs, making him notorious within the industry. His films, while popular in their day, often reinforced the very stereotypes and divisions he upheld in his personal life. Brennan stands as a stark reminder that some of Hollywood's biggest stars used their influence to actively resist social progress. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford is often remembered for her dramatic roles and equally dramatic personal life. But there's another side to her legacy: her deep-seated racism. Crawford came from a Southern background, and even as she rose to Hollywood royalty, she maintained attitudes shaped by segregation and prejudice. She reportedly insisted on segregated dressing rooms and was quick to fire minority staff if they did not know their place. Crawford's behavior on set included humiliating non-white extras and making sure they received lesser accommodations. Even in her private life, Crawford made little effort to hide her disdain for minorities, often excluding them from her social events and parties. Friends and industry insiders describe Crawford as cold and elitist, especially toward people of color. While her performances and screen presence made her a legend, the way she treated minority colleagues and staff speaks volumes about her true character. Her actions contributed to the climate of exclusion that defined much of early Hollywood. William Frawley. William Frawley's face is instantly recognizable thanks to his role as Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy. But his reputation for being difficult was compounded by an openly racist streak. Frawley was notorious for his use of racial slurs on and off set. Colleagues recalled that he frequently targeted minority staff with demeaning language and would make a point of excluding them from social gatherings. While the times were certainly different, Frawley's behavior often went beyond what was considered normal for his era, making him a divisive figure even among his peers. He was also known for his misogyny, but it was his racism that left the deepest scars, particularly for those who worked with him. Desi Arnaz, who cast Frawley in I Love Lucy, reportedly overlooked these attitudes for the sake of the show's success. But behind the scenes, Frawley's prejudice created a toxic environment. Frawley's story is a reminder that talent and popularity often coexisted with ugly personal beliefs in the golden age of Hollywood. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo's enigmatic persona helped make her a legend, but it also served to hide attitudes that were far from progressive. Garbo's background was shaped by growing up in a racially homogeneous Sweden, and those biases carried over when she arrived in Hollywood. While she was famously private, colleagues and biographers describe Garbo as distant, particularly toward minorities. She avoided films that featured non-white characters in significant roles and was rarely seen interacting with Black or Latino colleagues. Even off-screen, Garbo's social life was overwhelmingly white, and she reportedly declined invitations to events or gatherings where she knew minority entertainers would be present. Her coldness wasn't just about her personal privacy. It reflected a worldview shaped by exclusion. While she didn't make public statements, her actions spoke for themselves, helping to maintain the industry's informal segregation. Garbo's iconic status in cinema is unchallenged, but her personal attitudes serve as a sobering reminder that even the most admired stars were often complicit in perpetuating prejudice. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, known for his iconic character, the Tramp, is celebrated for his contributions to film, but his record on race is far less admirable. Chaplin's early movies included racial caricatures and jokes at the expense of minorities, reflecting a casual racism that was common in silent films. While Chaplin sometimes spoke out against injustice in general terms, he rarely extended this advocacy to issues of racial equality in America. Letters and interviews from the era reveal that Chaplin was uncomfortable with the growing visibility of Black and immigrant artists in Hollywood. He also tended to hire minorities only for background roles or as comic relief, never giving them a chance to shine in more substantial parts. Despite his reputation as a social critic and progressive, Chaplin's actions on set often reinforced the very stereotypes he sometimes seemed to critique. His reluctance to challenge Hollywood's racial hierarchy was not just a reflection of the era, but a personal choice that limited the impact of his otherwise groundbreaking work. Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple's cherubic face made her America's sweetheart, but the environment she grew up in was steeped in Hollywood's racial stereotypes. Temple's early films, including the famous The Little Colonel, featured her dancing with black actor Bill Bojangles Robinson. But even these moments were carefully stage-managed to maintain social distance. Off-screen, Temple's interactions with black co-stars were limited, and studio executives made sure she followed the era's unwritten rules about segregation. As she grew older, Temple's views remained largely shaped by her upbringing. She aligned herself with conservative politicians and avoided speaking out on civil rights. While she wasn't as publicly vocal as some of her contemporaries, her silence and complicity helped maintain the exclusionary system that kept minority artists from advancing. Temple's legacy is often viewed through a lens of innocence, but the roles she played and the attitudes she upheld are a reminder of Hollywood's deep-seated prejudices and the powerful role stars played in maintaining them. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart is synonymous with the golden age of Hollywood, but his legacy isn't as progressive as some might hope. Bogart was sometimes described as open-minded for his friendships with black musicians, but those who knew him well say he used racial slurs in casual conversation and was dismissive of calls for greater inclusion in Hollywood. While he occasionally hired minority performers, he rarely gave them significant roles, preferring instead to keep the status quo. Off-screen, Bogart often expressed concern that increasing diversity would ruin the industry's traditional appeal. His films sometimes relied on outdated and offensive stereotypes, and he never used his considerable influence to push for change. Despite his image as a tough guy with a heart of gold, Bogart's attitudes toward race reflected a reluctance to challenge the norms that kept Hollywood segregated. For all his charisma and talent, Bogart's failure to support progress is an important and uncomfortable part of his story. Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine, the Oscar-winning star of classics like Rebecca, cultivated an air of grace and sophistication. But behind that elegance lay deeply held prejudices. Fontaine was known in Hollywood for her insistence on working with all-white casts, and was uncomfortable when non-white actors or extras were present on set. She reportedly went so far as to request that black and Latino performers be kept away from her dressing room or scenes. Fontaine's private letters and interviews reveal skepticism and even hostility toward the civil rights movement, believing efforts for equality were disruptive. Her selective friendships and work choices reinforced Hollywood's informal system of segregation, limiting opportunities for minority artists. Even as the industry slowly began to change, Fontaine remained committed to old-fashioned exclusivity. Her legacy as a leading lady is assured, but the impact of her actions and beliefs contributed to the ongoing marginalization of non-white talent in classic Hollywood, a reality often glossed over in the history books. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire dazzled audiences with his dancing and charm, but he was also a product and enforcer of Hollywood's exclusionary system. Astaire performed several routines in blackface, most notably in Swing Time, and rarely questioned the industry's reliance on racist stereotypes for entertainment. He frequently made light of minorities in backstage banter, and on set, preferred that major roles went to white actors. Astaire's defenders argue he was simply reflecting the norms of his time, but the truth is, he was in a position to challenge those norms and chose not to. His enormous influence could have opened doors for minority dancers and performers, but Astaire remained focused on maintaining the industry's traditional structure. Even off-screen, Astaire's friendships and professional relationships were almost exclusively white. While his talent and contributions to dance are undeniable, Astaire's refusal to address or even acknowledge Hollywood's racism reveals the limitations of his legacy and the ways in which beloved entertainers can reinforce the very barriers they might have helped dismantle. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby's smooth voice and laid-back style made him one of the most popular entertainers of the 20th century. But beneath that easygoing exterior was a man whose attitudes reflected deep-seated racism. Crosby was known for making racist jokes, both on air and in private, and frequently made derogatory remarks about Black and Asian musicians. On his radio shows and movies, minorities were almost always relegated to background roles or played as stereotypes, and Crosby resisted efforts to bring more diversity to his productions. Friends and collaborators described Crosby as uncomfortable around Black artists, preferring to keep his professional circles exclusively white. Even as public opinion shifted, Crosby clung to his old-fashioned values, dismissing calls for change as political correctness. His failure to use his influence to support minority performers or challenge the industry's racial barriers stands in sharp contrast to his image as a genial, all-American icon. Crosby's story is another example of how beloved figures often played a role in maintaining Hollywood's exclusionary culture. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich is frequently celebrated for her pioneering work in gender and sexuality, but her record on race is more ambiguous. Although she opposed fascism and spoke out against Hitler, Dietrich rarely addressed America's racial injustices, even as she became a major star in Hollywood. Biographers and former colleagues recall Dietrich making disparaging comments about Black, Asian, and Latino artists, and she often preferred to work with white casts and crews. Dietrich's progressive reputation was largely built on her personal style and European sophistication, not on any real advocacy for minority rights. Her silence on civil rights issues is notable, given her outspoken stance on other topics. Dietrich's selective activism reflects the contradictions of many Golden Age stars, willing to challenge some forms of oppression, but silent or complicit when it came to race. For all her innovation, Dietrich's reluctance to support racial equality limits her standing as a truly progressive icon. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper's quiet strength and rugged screen presence made him a favorite of American audiences, but off-screen, his attitudes toward race were anything but heroic. Cooper was known for his staunch conservatism and was openly critical of the civil rights movement, calling efforts at integration a threat to American values. On movie sets, he avoided interacting with non-white colleagues and was uncomfortable when scripts or casting decisions pushed for more diversity. Colleagues described Cooper as polite but distant around minorities, maintaining a clear boundary between himself and those he viewed as other. His private correspondence includes remarks dismissive of Black and immigrant artists. While Cooper's defenders insist he was simply a product of his time, his active resistance to change and preference for the racial status quo made him a barrier to progress in the industry. Cooper's example illustrates how even Hollywood's most celebrated figures were deeply invested in preserving a segregated system. Lauren Bacall. Lauren Bacall, with her iconic voice and striking looks, was a groundbreaking star for women, but not for racial progress. Bacall rarely spoke publicly about race, but behind closed doors, she often expressed discomfort with the growing movement toward integration in Hollywood. On set, she was known for preferring white casts and crews, sometimes making it clear she was unhappy with minority performers in major roles. Biographers have noted that Bacall's upbringing and early career, set within the insulated world of New York's white elite, shaped her views. She avoided controversy by staying silent on civil rights, but her reluctance to support minority colleagues or challenge discriminatory practices made her complicit in the industry's exclusionary system. Bacall's legacy as a powerful female star is unquestionable, but her lack of advocacy for broader equality reflects the limitations of her progressivism. For all her achievements, Bacall's story is a reminder that social change in Hollywood has often come slowly, and not always with the help of its biggest stars. If this video surprised you or made you rethink classic Hollywood, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening stories from the world of entertainment. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.